Well, it is a big week ahead for leaders at Chicago Public Schools. Interim CEO Macklin King needs to present her budget plan by Wednesday, so the Board of Education can pass it by the end of the month. It's not clear yet how they plan to fill the district's looming $734 million budget gap headed into the new school year. Here's what Mayor Johnson said on Tuesday.
We're looking at multiple things. There's ways in which we can find some more efficiencies, particularly in central office, where there's some, I guess, layers of duplicity. And so we're going to work to cut some of those measures out. But really, the bottom line is still that whatever we do in this budget, it doesn't take away the fact that the state of Illinois has a responsibility and an obligation to work with me, to work with the Board of Education, to work with districts all over the state to ensure that the efforts that are coming from the White House, that they don't affect the everyday house of working people in this city.
The district has limited options to add revenue on their own. School board president Sean Hardin says borrowing money should be on the table. And despite pleas from the mayor for the State House to step in and help, well, there's no commitment from the legislature and few new ideas on the table, even after a meeting with key stakeholders late last month.
We don't need any additional reports, no more analysis from the sidelines. What we just need are solutions.
We cannot completely cut our way out of this situation. To do so would have a devastating consequence on the day-to-day operations of our schools and therefore the quality of our students' education.
Rima Amin is a reporter with Chalk Beat Chicago. She's here now to talk about what is next. Rima, good morning to you. Thanks for joining me. Look, since this end of August deadline is upon us, let's just find out now as we head into a new week, where do things stand?
Yeah, so we still don't have clarity on how the district plans to close the $734 million deficit. What we do know is that district officials so far have cut $165 million of that, which is about 1/5 of that budget gap, through a variety of cuts and layoffs at the central office level. That also includes crossing guards. And the district also solidified plans to cut about close to 500 custodians by moving custodial services in-house. So, there's still a ways to go. Also, the state released its calculations for how much money it will be giving to districts under one of its main funding formulas. And the district is actually expecting to get about $50 million more in that funding than it expected. So you're probably looking at closer to a $519 million deficit at this point. And as I said, it's not clear if they will choose a mix of cuts, maybe borrowing, other things to try to close that hole.
And I want to talk about some of those things with you. But the point you make, of course, there's only two things you can do, and that is you gain revenue or you cut expenses. That's it. Let me talk a little bit about those cuts. They can be tough. You mentioned the 500 custodian jobs. It also includes ending private custodial contracts. That could create, in a literal way, a real mess inside school. CPS somehow saying they're going to oversee all of that. What is your reporting showing about where that stands?
Yes, so the district plans to end 7 private custodial contracts. Now, the district has had a hybrid system. It's managed some of their custodial services in-house and then also contracted with these private companies. So, they've claimed that, this has been a goal to rely less on privatized services, but that also this change is also largely in part due to their financial constraints. Charles Mayfield, the chief operating officer of the district, told me that, he thinks that because of new technology and, more, better training the district is offering, that he is anticipating schools to be as clean or, in better condition than people might remember from years ago. But the truth is we'll have to see how that plays out on the ground. Cutting to 500 custodians, schools will probably feel that impact to some extent.
And of course, cuts are always tougher than the desire to raise revenue, as we see with politicians. You've talked about the raising revenue, which there's a variety of ways of doing it. They can borrow money. They can increase the corporate income tax. There's property taxes. There's the digital advertising tax. The mayor's talked about some of those things in press conferences that he's been holding. And I don't know how positive those things are going to be received by others, but I'm curious, do you have any reporting on how the dynamics of this hybrid school board, elected and appointed mix, where that stands and how it impacts getting things passed?
Yeah, so, it is an interesting dynamic. You will have, you have the mayor's appointees who generally, vote a certain way or with an ideology that's aligned with the mayor, of course, which is expected. These are appointees who represent the mayor and his interests on the board, but they will also tell you they represent the interests of all Chicagoans. And then you have the elected officials, many of whom think differently and vote in a different way. And so, I think several of the elected officials have expressed, resistance to borrowing, saying that the debt would be harmful for the district's budget and that it would be bad for the district's bond rating. Some of those same individuals say that they don't want to reimburse the city with a much disputed pension payment. But many of the appointed members have said, no, we need to pay into that. In part because that leaves the city of Chicago budget in a bad situation. And so those are some of the key, I think, factors to look out for as we go into the district figuring out how to close this budget hole, because those are sizable amounts of money that folks still disagree on how to solve.
Yeah, I agree with you. And cuts are always reluctant, as I said, not meeting the municipal pension reimbursement, cutting classrooms, cutting departments, consolidating teacher pensions. It strikes me as if some of those things are like cutting off your nose to spite your face. You're just creating a problem for tomorrow.
Right. And I think this is one of the things that we try to get at in the article you're referencing, but it's difficult because some solutions can be long-term, like, for example, raising the corporate income tax or consolidating teacher pensions. But there are many political challenges there. First of all, you need people to be on board. You need corporations to be on board. Maybe not necessarily, but you need supporters for these ideas. And these same ideas certainly have many supporters, but also many opponents. Even though they would provide a long-term financial solution for the district. At the same time, if you do something like get more tip surplus funds from the city, right? There are supporters for that, but then what happens next year? That's a short-term solution. So it really requires, I think, more discussion and more whipping up of support that a majority of people can get behind.
So there's no question that Springfield suggests it cares a lot about this. I don't have any doubt that they do, but then they've got to deal with the problem. So far, no calls yet to have a special session to deal with this issue. Interim CPS CEO Macklin King, she's given testimony to state lawmakers saying we could be seeing cuts of not just crossing guards, hot meals, those kinds of things. That's very concerning. These are fundamental needs. Any sense of where Springfield is sitting on this?
Yeah, so, as you all referenced earlier, there was a state hearing with CPS officials last week. Frankly, that hearing, it seemed that lawmakers were trying to get a sense of where Chicago stands in this moment, but there weren't many questions for top CPS officials that day. And there certainly were no commitments to, certainly not to have a special session, but even to increase funding for school districts across the state or Chicago alone. Afterwards, I talked to some state reps who said, look, we want to help the way that we can, but we also have our own concerns at the state level to worry about, such as where do we find more money? And it seemed clear to me that for now, the state is offering no clear solutions to CPS. And that if CPS wants state help, they are probably going to have to engage in even more conversations with the state, and that help is likely not coming today.
Yeah, and that's why we'll keep an eye on this through the week and obviously through the month, see what happens by the end of August. Rima Amin of Chalkbeat, thank you for your insight. You're catching us up. We appreciate it. We'll call on you again. Have a great Sunday. Thank you.
You too.